Hello, everyone. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful Friday, at least here in Columbus, as we discuss what has happened within the Senate subbill and what has happened in the last few weeks and our outlook moving forward in this budget process. So we are coming to the final 2 weeks. It's been certainly an exciting time, and we do know that the next 2 weeks will bring certainly some changes for better or for worse. So let's go ahead and dive in. So what has happened the past few weeks? So we have pushed back our webinar just to kind of respond to the pace of the General Assembly. The Senate took a little bit longer to pull together their changes than anticipated, but that is certainly just fine. But they are working on this deadline. So the Senate released their version of the budget this past Tuesday. So in single space form, all the changes take about 19 pages of text to kind of discuss all the changes that they made. Some good, some bad. Some might seem innocuous, but we continue to learn more about what's been going on. The full Senate Finance Committee has accepted testimony the past several days and will continue into Monday, hearing about those changes that they made as they gather their amendments together for the Omnibus bill. So this will be the final round of changes that the Senate Finance Committee can make to the bill before it's voted in the Senate Finance Committee and then later on the floor. So we've heard intel that the amendments are due today to the Senate Finance Chair's office, that's Senator Dolan, and they'll continue to hear public testimony, but the amendment deadline is today. So if you are discussing any amendments or thoughts with some offices, make sure that you get that process moving as we move through the day. So outlook for timeline as we move forward in the next few weeks. So again, of those amendments are due by the end of the day today. We are expecting to see the Omnibus Amendment. So again, a bunch of changes either next Tuesday or Wednesday. I would anticipate Wednesday to give the Legislative Service Commission a few extra days to make those changes and draft all that text and different changes they need to. So at the same time that the Omnibus Amendment is revealed, I believe there will be, again, no additional opportunities for testimony to the full Senate committee. They will go ahead and vote on that amendment to accept it, and then later, probably in the same hearing, vote on the full bill within Senate Finance. So again, I anticipate that to happen this next Wednesday, June 19th, and that leads us to a full Senate floor vote either Thursday the 20th or if they want to push it back to Friday, June 21st. So there will be opportunities for amendments during that time on the floor. Most of the time, I will say, just from past experience, many are tabled and not voted on, but we could see there may be some technical changes and such and other things that happen in the next week that they want to make sure is inserted into the bill. So after the Senate votes, it is time for the Senate and the House to recognize and work out their differences between the two versions of the bill. If you've been following some media coverage this week, we know that the House Speaker has expressed some of his thoughts and opinions on what the Senate has done so far. I'm sure they're having preliminary discussions about how they're going to come to agreement in the next week. So beginning June 24th at some time, they will call conference committee and they will, again, recognize those changes and come to a compromise and agreement on a bill to send to the governor. I know in the past few years, in the past few budgets, we have not missed the deadline for June 30th. There has been record, though, within the last decade of that June 30th deadline passing by and forcing the General Assembly to pass kind of temporary budgets week by week until they can come to an agreement. Though we don't hope that that's the case. I know I, for one, have some July 4th plans. I'm not sure about you all out there, but again, prepared to keep an eye on that process if we do not make the June 30th deadline. I will remind everyone that they did not meet the transportation budget deadline that went past at least several days, almost a week past deadline when trying to come to an agreement. So again, Sunday, June 30th is the final deadline for the governor's veto messages. I know that his administration has been working on those for a while now, and we'll see what his thoughts are on the final version of the budget. And then he, of course, has to sign it by that Sunday. So again, the next 2 weeks will bring lots of new changes. We could see some completely new proposals within the budget as we continue to move forward. And as always, we will be here to give you an update on what's happening. Just for a look ahead, if there are lots of changes in the Omnibus Amendment, especially some that within AOF rise to the level of an action alert, we want to make sure that our partners and our endorsing organizations know what's happening and give some call to action. If any issues rise to that level, we will, of course, make sure that that's known via email. And we may also put on another webinar coming up next Friday to kind of discuss what's happening and give you a good idea as to what is good or bad about what's going on. So with that being said, I wanted to give just a quick update on where some of Advocates for Ohio's future priorities stand. So we are still waiting to see an investment in the state 2020 census efforts. So we know that the Development Services Agency is charged with administrating the 2020 census on the state end. However, they have not included dedicated funding within the budget to make sure that local communities have the support they need to ensure every single Ohioan is counted and counted appropriately in the 2020 census. This means billions of dollars drawn down from the federal government, especially for Health and Human Service programming. This past round, so back in 2010, there was no state support either for the census efforts. It is estimated that the state of Ohio missed around 70,000 residents, and we lost a seat in Congress due to that undercount. It is projected, the Urban Institute has been doing some research onto what or how many Ohioans could be missed in 2020, and right now that number stands at about 74,000 are at risk of being missed. A couple issues that contribute to this, again, the census will be administered mostly online. We do have some connectivity and broadband issues in Ohio, so that will be difficult for those individuals to complete their census. Also, excuse me. All right, sorry folks, I lost you there for a second. Oh, sorry folks, I lost you there for a second. I think we're back. Again, census funding, very, very important. This is, we've tried at every single round, along with our partners at the Ohio Census Advocacy Coalition, to increase that support for local governments as we move forward. So we'll continue to advocate for that issue. There is a provision in the budget that instructs the director of the Jobs and Family Services Agency to work with the federal government to come up with a work requirement, essentially, program for Ohio Works First or cash recipients or cash assistance recipients. So these individuals, a family of three, must have less than 50% of the federal poverty level. That's about $10,000 a year in income. So this is cash assistance. Normal monthly distribution is around $200. That, of course, increases with the number of family members within the assistance group. But these OWF participants, these adults, are already subject to work requirements. So this is a trend that we've been noticing as the General Assembly have moved forward. Work requirements within the cash assistance program, within the SNAP or food stamps, food assistance program, and then soon to be work requirements for Medicaid. We've been hearing from people subject to these requirements now that there is certainly a lack of opportunity and capacity within our counties for quality work and training experience programs. Some county JFS offices just really do the very best they can to allow counties or allow these recipients to fulfill their requirements, and they provide some kind of programming, but there, again, quality really is a range around our counties. We really would like to see an investment in these training and education programs to ensure that people who are subject to requirements have the opportunity to do so, and they can do so in their own local communities. The Senate subbill also removed funding for K through 12 prevention efforts. So this is drug and mental health awareness and prevention efforts, and also removed another $18 million for public media campaigns to increase education and awareness about mental health and to reduce stigma. So this is something that we've been working with the mental health addiction, mental health and addiction advocacy coalition to really push for. So we were disappointed to see those funds were removed by the Senate. We will continue to advocate to have them put back into the final budget as we move forward. Senate Bill 6, so this is an interesting bill that concerns temporary child hosting. So this bill was introduced by Senators Coley and Hottinger in the Senate, and between introduction and passing, about 14 days was that entire process. It was a very quick process over in the Senate. It was voted out unanimously in the Senate. So in the House, we know that various stakeholders, a number of our members, and the Jobs and Family Services Agency have been talking with the co-sponsors about some issues with this bill. On its face, it sounds like a good alternative for families who are facing kind of short-term crisis to work with an agency to temporarily place their children with host families, again, pertaining to some requirements and background checks and such. But, there's been some stories and some issues with this bill. We really want to make it strong, make sure the regulations are very strong in that bill. So we are just certainly asking the General Assembly to remove the provisions of Senate Bill 6. So the entire bill was inserted into the budget. If we could just take that out, and we'll continue to work on it through the House committee process. It's currently working through House Health. It's had its first hearing, and we know our stakeholders and our members have asked to allow them that time to make the bill the very best it can be. We were also disappointed to see that the Ohio Housing Trust Fund did not see an increase with their funding levels in the budget, as they had been requesting a modest increase in county recorder fees. So that's how the trust fund is built, and that's what feeds into the trust fund. These recorder fees have not been increased since in almost 20 years. And what they were asking for, again, I think it was a $4 increase for that first page of official documents when they scan in and they record. And this would add about $8 million for the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. So looking out for fiscal year 2020, they have anticipated about $43 million. And in 2005, so it was $73 million. So we've certainly seen a big dip in support for affordable housing throughout our communities, and are hoping that the Senate and the final version of the budget will include additional support for the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. So almost through these issues here. So we did see, so $20 million were removed for the Help Me Grow program. This is executed by the Ohio Department of Health, and it's the evidence-based home visiting program that we know that the governor and other members of the General Assembly have really made a priority throughout this new administration. I think we were all surprised, along with our stakeholders, to see that this funding was removed, and we will continue to ask questions, see what the plan for home visiting, evidence-based home visiting, will be in the future. We did notice that the Senate required managed care companies, so managed care plans, to include evidence-based home visiting in their services for their Medicaid recipients. So this is a positive step, but we want to make sure that these dollars in this home visiting program is available to maybe more than just our Medicaid participants. So we will continue to watch that item. We understand there was a lot of testimony on this in Senate Finance yesterday and today. So we are keeping our eye on this one to make sure that, again, there is a plan in place to really kind of ramp up these home visiting efforts and support for the program. So we also did not see any increase to access for publicly funded child care within the state. So currently it's 130% of the federal poverty level. We've been advocating, along with a lot of our partners, to increase that eligibility level to 150% of the federal poverty level. For a family of 4 in Ohio this year, that would account to about just less than $40,000 worth of income in order to qualify for that subsidy and to have that quality child care. And along that front, we were happy to see that a new $10 million were invested for childcare providers to help them step up to quality standards. This program and childcare providers are coming up to a benchmark in 2020 of things that they need to achieve to make sure that they are rated in this, that they are really following quality standards as they move through, and try to improve their systems within childcare. So we are very excited to see those dollars there. But again, we've always advocated that we want to make sure that we are reaching as many children as possible through our childcare program and make sure that reinstate those levels. So back in 2009, the state of Ohio was at 200% of the federal poverty level for eligibility for childcare. So we would like to see that percentage move up especially as the economy improves and we have the capacity to do so. A very last issue that AOF would like to point out. So we would again like to see the state earned income tax credit made refundable. So there were a number of tax changes that were included in the bill, and we will certainly talk about those later, but a 10% refundable earned income tax credit would certainly do much more for the poorest Ohioans than the rate and bracket cuts that the Senate tax plan introduced. So right now, the earned income tax credit is at 30%, and there's no cap, so that cap has been removed. So this is great that the percentage has increased, but without being refundable, those dollars do not go back into the hands of poor families. And again, in order to receive this tax credit, families must be working. So it certainly is an incentive to work. It is cash back that it can be spent on basic needs for these families, and again, is reinvested back into their local communities. So we will continue to push for a refundable EITC, even if it is at that lower percentage range. And then when we send this PowerPoint out, when we send the slides out with our follow-up email, we'll have a link that you can access to read kind of our full testimony. We submitted written testimony to Senate Finance today. That's very extensive and certainly goes into these issues a little bit further. So I wanted to highlight a couple of the other major changes in some of the areas that we cover and would be interested to some of the people here on our webinar today. I want to talk about children's services and early childhood care and education. So they did restore $15 million per fiscal year to provide assistance for kinship caregivers. So these are family members that may take in a child whose parents are suffering with opioid addiction or certainly cannot take care of them for that time. So this is additional support for these families, and this is something that the state has been working on for a while. So we were happy to see that these dollars were increased. We did talk about that additional $10 million for childcare providers. And we're back, excuse us, to help them meet those step up to quality requirements in 2020. So these grants, so they will be competitive grants that will be granted to communities to provide for wage incentives and assistance with certification, some curriculum changes and such. So again, very excited to see those dollars were invested. Also wanted to briefly mention, so multi-system youth has been quite a subject throughout budget deliberations. As of now, the state of Ohio has an issue when a child is involved in multiple systems. Maybe they have a developmental disability and they're in charge or involved in the juvenile justice system. So they need, of course, a broader range of services to make sure that they meet their needs. And unfortunately, when a child becomes too expensive, or their care becomes too expensive, families are often faced with no choice but to relinquish their custody to the state in order to get their children the care that they need and the services that they need. So this is something that especially the Senate and the House has taken up as a priority to make sure that we have funding available to avoid custody relinquishment at all costs for these multi-system youth. So we have seen a little bit of change in the Senate. Allocates $4 million in the first year and then $6 million in the second year of the biennium to dedicate $4 for these families. This is a little bit of a decrease from what we saw in the House, and also these dollars have been moved to the Department of Medicaid. So we are, again, very happy and encouraged that the General Assembly is taking up this issue to make some real changes with how we deal with multi-system youth here in the state, but would like to see, again, maybe a little bit more of an increase in those dollars and more dedicated funding for these families. K through 12 education. So this the original investment, the governor proposed a $550 million for student wellness and success programs, or wraparound services, as we've been calling them here. So the House actually increased to $625 million over 2 years, which is fantastic. It's an unprecedented amount. But the Senate decided to remove that additional $125 million, go back to the $550 million proposal, and use those dollars for other education programs. And it also expands private school or community school vouchers, and also includes additional funding for fast-growing and high-growth school districts. So this is certainly one of the issues that has been a hot topic, specifically between the Speaker and the Senate the past few days. There's been just a lot of talk about what these dollars could go to. There's been talk about the school funding formula in general, as we know that this funding formula has been unconstitutional for decades at this point, and how we attribute dollars to more impoverished or less privileged school districts, as opposed to our more wealthy school districts, which often see these high growth numbers but are subject to a cap on increased funding. So I'm sure that we'll see some changes next week as to how that formula kind of pans out, and we'll certainly be paying close attention. Also wanted to draw attention to the academic distress commissions. These were first introduced in House Bill 70 to address some failing school districts, mostly kind of larger public districts across the state have been subject to these academic distress commissions. And there's been a push to eliminate this process and restore, again, power back to the locally elected school boards, rather than having outside individuals come in as a kind of a CEO position to make some changes that they feel is best for the school. So right now, a House bill that has bipartisan support and has been passed by the House has been completely inserted into the budget, and we know some of our partners are incredibly supportive of this version but we do know that there continue to be new versions and new proposals to address this issue as they move forward. So we'll certainly see some issues and some changes within this item as we go into next week. Very quickly, I'll discuss some tax changes. The Senate plan eliminated the bottom two tax brackets for income taxes, and there's a slight decrease in the amount of income that would no longer count. Everybody in Ohio gets a tax break. As we see, kind of those middle incomes will be probably less than about $100. And as you increase in the income brackets, you'll see a larger cut as they move forward. The Senate president has said that these tax cuts will help to offset the gas tax increase that Ohioans will begin to experience on July 1st. So that's when that additional cents on every gallon of gasoline will come into play. So that is their plan. Again, we will probably see some changes to these tax changes going into next week. The small business and LLC loophole, the House had reduced that amount. So originally it was small businesses paid no taxes on their first $250,000 worth of income. The House brought that down to $100,000. And the Senate decided that they wanted to continue this break for these small businesses and brought it back to $250,000, and then made them pay a little bit more on the back end. So this will probably reduce the break by about $300 million. So this will be more revenue that the state can use as they move forward. This is another thing that the Speaker has expressed a specific interest in, and we may see some changes in as we move forward. Good news for teachers, a new tax break up to $250 for classroom expenses, which is great, certainly something that we are very supportive of. And the Senate reintroduced and reinserted tax breaks for movie and TV productions to the tune of $40 million. And they also expanded them to Broadway theater type productions. So this is very interesting. There was a lot of testimony on this issue, and also reinstated tax breaks on the purchases of rare coins and bullion. A few other just items that we would like to highlight as we move forward. So there was a little bit of an increase to the local government fund, and also a slight increase to the public library fund, which is fantastic. And I know that our libraries have been celebrating this increase the past few weeks. For higher education, so the state has increased an additional 1% of that state support for colleges, which is fantastic. It's about a $40 million increase, and also increase in the Ohio College Opportunity Grant for about $3 million per year. So these are for students who attend mostly community colleges, additional grants and opportunities for those students. So the H2O, or Governor DeWine's H2O Ohio initiative to really focus on cleaning up Lake Erie and making sure that we invest in and keeping the waters clean and clear for all Ohioans to enjoy. Originally, DeWine's proposal was $900 million for this initiative. So the Senate has brought it to $172 million, and they will continue to study the issue and see what other changes they can make to improve our water supply and make sure that they are clean and safe. Last 2 points here. Was very surprised that this has stayed in. I know, at least in my experience within the state legislature, they have always tried in the budget bill to increase the legal age for purchasing tobacco to 21. They have not been successful thus far. So as of now, so that does raise the legal age to 21 from 18 to purchase tobacco products, also increases or institutes a new tax on e-cigarettes and other vaping products that will actually be paid by a distributor. So there will probably be a rise in prices on those products as well to combat that new tax. Last issue you wanted to bring up, there was additional funding for the Ohio Parenting and Pregnancy Program, which goes along with the General Assembly's recent actions for restrictions on abortion and other healthcare related issues for women. So there was an additional $5 million included in that fund. So those are additional issues. Those are some of the major highlights we wanted to point out on the webinar today. Again, when you get the slides, there'll be additional links to some more information. That big 19-page summary report will be included as well, so you can see more of what the Senate has planned for. And feel free. So that is all I have for you today. Again, as we move forward in the next 2 weeks, there'll be lots of changes. Specifically, Omnibus Amendment will be coming out next Wednesday. And there'll be additional changes, and hopefully we will see a vote in the full Senate Finance and full Senate next week. So hold on tight as we go through these next 2 weeks, and we will be here with lots of questions and additional information on these issues. So we are noticing some coming in. Thank you so much, attendees, for moving forward. The first one concerns the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. So the drop so the drop for the Ohio Housing Trust Fund for recorder fees. So a major proponent and major cause of this is because the process in filing these documents has changed. So there are less pages. So in turn, and in essence, those fees have gone down and less money is being distributed into the Ohio Housing Trust Fund because of the way that these documents are filed. So I know we had some discussion in an earlier webinar about this process becoming electronic. So we are not quite there yet. And that will certainly be a big change for this Ohio Housing Trust Fund when they get to that point. But a big change, or a big reason for the change in the drop of support is, again, less pages are being filed. Second question I see, the tracking on data on maternal mortality. So we did see an increase. So this is something our partners at the Center for Community Solutions have been working on for the past several years. It would require the Department of Health to publish information and to gather some more, some deeper data on maternal mortality as we move forward. And the Center for Community Solutions have achieved a success in their pursuit of more information. So now the Department of Health is required to put out a report biannual report. So every 2 years, they'll distribute new information on instances of maternal morbidity and mortality within the state. So again, this is an area where we haven't had new information since 2014, and this will certainly help us see what is happening with our mothers and mothers in the state, and what's happening when they do give birth, and for a year afterwards, how their care is affected and how we can make some improvements in that area. Oh, and thank you so much. If you do draw your attention to the attendee chat, we do have some answers are also being contributed by some of our webinar participants today. Thanks, Will, for your comment on the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. And yes, absolutely, the recession is a fantastic point that there are the housing market taking a hit. Again, less documents have been filed, less fees have been collected, and that accounts for the drop in support for the Ohio Housing Trust Fund. So early intervention. So I'm wondering if we could get more information about which kind of early intervention, if it's with, oh, we have more. Thank you so much, Tara. And thank you guys so much for participating in offering some answers and insight into some of these questions. Intervention, if we're talking about schools of this, possibly evidence-based home visiting. Again, or $20 million was removed from that Help Me Grow program. We are going to continue to move forward and push for those dollars to be added back in, and we will give you an update on any other changes that happen in that early intervention. And if you would like to email me specifically any questions on what program or line item, happy to get back to you as soon as possible. So we will go ahead and leave this open for the next few minutes. If there are some more questions, if any of our participants would like to offer their knowledge and insight on any of these questions, that'd be fantastic. We will open it up for the next probably 5 minutes. Will be open. And once again, after we have finished, these slides will be distributed, as well as any answers to questions that we've come up with before the afternoon begins. So thanks again for your participation, everyone. We certainly appreciate it. And keep an eye on your email for any action alerts or calls to action for major issues that happen in the Omnibus next week. And we will be having a webinar to go over some of the major issues that do occur. So thanks again for your time, everyone. Please have a wonderful and safe weekend, and we will see you soon.